The morning sun breaks over Hakata Bay on the island of Kyushu, Japan's westernmost major island, and what it reveals is a sight beyond comprehension, beyond nightmare, beyond anything the samurai warriors assembled on the beach have ever imagined. The horizon is black with ships, not dozens, not hundreds, 900 vessels. The entire bay, as far as the eye can see in either direction, is filled with foreign warships unlike anything in Japanese experience. These are not the elegant, curved vessels of Japanese tradition, but massive, flat-bottomed Chinese and Korean warships, their decks bristling with warriors, their hulls painted in colors that seem almost obscene in their brightness, reds and golds and blacks that shimmer in the cold November light. On the decks of these ships stand 23,000 warriors from across the Mongol Empire, Mongol cavalry archers from the steppes, Chinese siege engineers, Korean sailors pressed into service, soldiers speaking a dozen different languages, united under one banner, the standard of Kublai Khan, grandson of Genghis Khan, ruler of the largest land empire the world has ever known. And now he has come for Japan. Takazaki Suenaga, a low-ranking samurai from Higo province, stands on the beach among the assembled Japanese defenders. He is 24 years old, equipped with his family's ancestral armor, iron plates laced with leather, a helmet adorned with buffalo horns, 2 swords at his side. His hands tremble slightly as he grips his bow. Not from fear, though fear is certainly present, but from a kind of ecstatic terror, the realization that he is about to witness the end of everything he knows, or the beginning of immortal glory. Behind him, perhaps 6,000 samurai, the hastily assembled forces of the Kyushu warlords, prepare for battle. They are outnumbered nearly 4 to 1. They have never fought foreign invaders. They have never seen the tactics, the weapons, the sheer organized brutality of the Mongol war machine that has conquered kingdoms from Korea to Hungary, from Burma to Poland. In 90 minutes, the battle will begin. In 3 days, the Mongol invasion will end in a way no one, Mongol, Japanese, or historian, could have predicted. But in this moment, as the ships begin lowering boats, as the sound of foreign drums begins to echo across the water, as thousands of warriors prepare to clash on Japanese soil for the first time in centuries, the future is unwritten and everything is possible. The largest amphibious invasion in Asian history to that point is about to begin, and the fate of Japan hangs in the balance. To understand why Mongol ships appeared off Japan in November 1274, we must travel backward 7 years to the marble halls of Khanbalik, what we now call Beijing, where Kublai Khan, 5th great Khan of the Mongol Empire, sits on a throne that commands 1/5 of the world's inhabited land. Kublai is 59 years old in 1267 when he first conceives the idea of conquering Japan. He is not the wild horseman of the steppes that his grandfather Genghis was. Kublai has spent decades in China, absorbing Chinese culture, bureaucracy, and imperial ambition. He wears silk robes as often as leather armor. He sponsors poets and astronomers. He is in the process of founding the Yuan dynasty, which will rule China for nearly a century. But beneath the Chinese veneer, he remains a Mongol conqueror with Mongol ambitions. And there is one prize that all his empire, all his wealth, all his power cannot grant him: the island nation of Japan, which sits tantalizingly close to his newly conquered Korean territories, yet has never bowed to any foreign power. The Mongol Empire in 1267 is incomprehensibly vast. Territory stretching from the Pacific Ocean to Eastern Europe, population of approximately 100 million people. Control of the Silk Road and most major trade routes. Recent conquests include Korea, 1259, the Song dynasty in southern China, in progress, and effective control over Burma, Tibet, and Central Asia. Kublai looks at maps and sees an empire broken only by water. Japan represents not just another conquest, but the completion of a vision, Mongol dominion over the entire known world. In 1268, Kublai sends his first diplomatic mission to Japan. The message, delivered through Korean intermediaries, is polite in form but absolute in substance. The Emperor of Great Mongolia addresses the King of Japan. Since the time of our ancestor, many distant lands have become subject to us. Korea is our eastern tributary. Your country and ours are close neighbors. Since your country's founding, you have occasionally sent tribute missions here. However, since I ascended the throne, you have sent no envoys. Perhaps you do not know of this. Therefore, I send this letter. I hope that henceforth friendly relations will be established between us. Nobody would wish to resort to arms. The implicit threat is clear. Submit peacefully or be conquered by force. The Japanese response? Silence. The Japanese court, located in Kyoto, hundreds of miles from any potential invasion point, receives the Mongol letter with a mixture of shock and aristocratic disdain. Japan has not faced foreign invasion since legendary antiquity. The very idea seems almost absurd. The country is ruled by a complex system that modern historians struggle to fully explain. The emperor, divine descendant of the sun goddess Amaterasu, living in ceremonial isolation in Kyoto, possessing religious authority but almost no political power. The shogun, military dictator, theoretically ruling on behalf of the emperor, but in 1268 the position is weak and contested. The Hojo Regency, the actual power in Japan. A clan of regents who control the shogun and therefore the military government, the bakufu. The daimyo, regional warlords controlling their own territories, sworn to the shogun, but often pursuing their own interests. In 1268, the de facto ruler is Hojo, Tokimun, the 8th Shikken regent of the Kamakura shogunate. He is only 18 years old, having inherited power after his father's death 2 years earlier. Young, untested, facing the most powerful empire in world history. Tokimun makes a decision that will define Japanese history for the next 7 years. He ignores the Mongol letter. The Japanese court sends no reply. This is partly aristocratic pride. Japan considers itself the land of the gods, superior to all foreign nations. It's partly practical calculation. Acknowledging the letter might imply accepting Mongol suzerainty. And it's partly simple incomprehension of the Mongol threat. These court nobles and samurai warlords have spent the last century fighting each other in civil wars. They literally cannot imagine what the Mongol Empire represents. Kublai sends a second letter in 1269 again. No reply. A third letter in 1271. Again, silence. The greatest empire on earth is being ignored by a collection of islands it could fit inside one of its provinces. Kublai's patience, never his strongest virtue, runs out. In 1273, Kublai issues the order: prepare an invasion fleet. If Japan will not submit peacefully, it will be conquered. While Kublai prepares his invasion, it's crucial to understand the profound cultural and military differences between the two forces that will soon collide in Hakata Bay. The Mongol military system, perfected by Genghis Khan and refined by his successors, is the most effective fighting force of the medieval period. Its advantages are multiple: organization, decimal system, units of 10, 100, 1,000, and 10,000 warriors, clear chain of command, coordinated multi-unit tactics, combined arms warfare, cavalry, infantry, siege weapons working together. Weapons: composite bows with ranges up to 300 yards, fire arrows and explosive devices using Chinese gunpowder technology, poison-tipped arrows, though sources debate this. Advanced siege equipment including trebuchets and catapults. Tactics: feigned retreats to draw enemies into ambushes, use of terror and psychological warfare. Massed arrow volleys before close combat, rapid maneuver and encirclement, total war, attacking military and civilian targets indiscriminately. Strategy: extensive intelligence gathering before campaigns, use of captured populations for engineering and logistics. Willingness to completely destroy resistant populations as examples. Long-term planning and multi-year campaigns. The Mongols have conquered sophisticated military powers, including the Khwarezmian Empire, the Jin dynasty, the Abbasid Caliphate, and numerous Russian principalities. By 1274, they are veterans of generations of warfare across 3 continents. The Japanese samurai in 1274 are warriors of a completely different tradition, shaped by centuries of internal conflict rather than external threats. Organization. Personal loyalty to individual lords, daimyo. Loose coordination between different clan forces. No unified. Command structure. Fighting often based on individual prowess rather than unit cohesion. Weapons. The bow. Q. Primary weapon, but with shorter range than Mongol composite bows. The tachi, longsword, prestigious weapon used primarily in close combat. The tanto, dagger, backup weapon. Minimal gunpowder technology, none in military use. Tactics, emphasis on individual combat between warriors of similar rank. Formal challenges before battle. Name announcing. Warriors would announce their name and lineage before engaging enemies. Hand-to-hand combat preferred over massed archery. Honor and personal glory paramount. Philosophy, Bushido, the way of the warrior. Codes of honor, loyalty, and courage. Death before dishonor. Individual achievement and recognition. Ritual and ceremony, integral to warfare. Social structure. Rigid class system. Samurai are hereditary warriors, superior to peasants and merchants. Complex codes of behavior and etiquette. Family honor and ancestral reputation crucial. Personal relationships and obligations defining political loyalty. As Dr. Thomas Conlon, professor of East Asian Studies at Princeton University, notes in his work on the Mongol invasions, the samurai of 1274 were preparing to fight a war according to rules that the Mongols had never heard of and would never honor. It was a cultural collision as much as a military one, 2 completely incompatible visions of how warfare should be conducted. By early 1274, the Mongol invasion is taking shape in the ports of southern Korea. The logistics are staggering. The invasion force, numbers from contemporary sources, 900 ships, Korean and Chinese vessels, 15,000 Mongol and Chinese warriors, 8,000 Korean warriors, many pressed into service unwillingly. 7,000 Korean sailors, supplies for a multi-month campaign, horses for Mongol cavalry, exact numbers unknown, but significant. The commander. The sources give us conflicting information, but the invasion appears to have been commanded by Hong Dagu, a Mongol general, and Kim Bang-gyeong, a Korean official, with various subordinate commanders for different divisions. The Korean population, recently conquered and brutally suppressed by the Mongols, has mixed feelings about the invasion. Korean shipwrights are forced to construct vessels at breakneck speed. Korean soldiers are conscripted. But there is also hope among some Koreans that if the invasion succeeds, Korea's position within the Mongol Empire might improve. A Korean chronicle from the period records, "The people labored day and night on the ships. Many collapsed from exhaustion. When the fleet finally sailed, there was relief, but also dread, for many knew they would never see their homes again." Meanwhile, in Japan, Hojo Tokimune is finally taking the Mongol threat seriously. Summer 1274. Orders go out to the daimyo of Kyushu, the westernmost major island and the obvious invasion point, to prepare defenses. Stone walls are to be constructed. Warriors are to be mobilized. Coastal watches are established. But the preparations are chaotic and incomplete. Japan has no tradition of defensive warfare against external threats. The daimyo are more accustomed to fighting each other than coordinating against a common enemy. Resources are limited. Time is shorter than anyone realizes. In Kyoto, the imperial court does what it does best: pray. The emperor orders special ceremonies at major shrines and temples across Japan. Priests beseech the gods, especially Hachiman, god of war, and Amaterasu, the sun goddess and ancestral deity of the imperial line, to protect Japan from the foreign invaders. These prayers will later be credited with what happens next. But in October 1274, as the Mongol fleet assembles in Korean ports, the prayers seem like desperate hope against impossible odds. Before the main invasion can proceed to Kyushu, the Mongol fleet must secure its flanks and eliminate potential threats. The first target is Tsushima, a mountainous island roughly halfway between Korea and Kyushu, with a population of a few thousand and a small samurai garrison. The defender of Tsushima is Sukakuni, the deputy governor, Jito, a middle-aged samurai responsible for the island's defense. Sukakuni commands perhaps 8,100 samurai and a few hundred auxiliary troops, peasants with spears, basically. On October 3rd, the Mongol fleet appears on the horizon. Sukakuni knows immediately that his island is doomed. The disparity in forces is so extreme that defense is mathematically impossible, but surrender is not in the samurai code. There is only one honorable path: to fight, to kill as many enemies as possible, and to die gloriously. The invasion of Tsushima takes approximately 2 days. The Mongols land in overwhelming force, perhaps 5,000 warriors against Sukakuni's 100 samurai. The Japanese fight according to their traditions: individual combat, formal challenges, seeking out worthy opponents. The Mongols fight according to theirs: massed archery, coordinated attacks, total war. Japanese chronicles record that Sukakuni and his men fought with extraordinary courage. Sukakuni personally killed many enemies before being overwhelmed. Rather than be captured, he committed seppuku, ritual suicide, as did many of his samurai. But the chronicles also record something that shocks and horrifies the Japanese: Mongol tactics that violate every samurai concept of honorable warfare. The Mongols use what later Japanese accounts call poisoned arrows, likely fire arrows or arrows with explosive charges attached, Chinese gunpowder technology that the Japanese have never encountered. They attack in coordinated groups rather than seeking individual combat. They show no interest in the names or lineages of their opponents. They kill wounded warriors rather than allowing them to commit ritual suicide. They take captive civilians, women and children, as slaves or worse. Most horrifying, according to later accounts, the kamikazes, Mongols bind captured women to the sides of their ships as human shields for the next phase of the invasion. This detail appears in multiple Japanese sources, though some historians debate its accuracy. Whether literally true or symbolic of Mongol ruthlessness, it becomes a powerful element of Japanese invasion narratives. The entire samurai garrison of Tsushima is wiped out. The civilian population is subjected to the full horrors of Mongol conquest: massacre, enslavement, rape, and pillage. Dr. Kawazue Shoji, former professor at Kyushu University and specialist in the Mongol invasions, writes, "Tsushima was Japan's first encounter with total war as practiced by the Mongols. The samurai expected a contest of individual martial skills. What they got was industrial-scale killing. The psychological shock may have been as significant as the military defeat." The pattern repeats at Iki, another small island between Tsushima and Kyushu. The defender here is Taira Kagetaka, commanding another small garrison of perhaps 100 samurai. Again, the disparity in forces is overwhelming. Again, the samurai fight with suicidal courage. Again, they are annihilated. One particular account survives in Japanese chronicles. Kagetaka's daughter, facing capture by Mongol soldiers, kills herself with her own dagger rather than face dishonor. The story, whether factual or legendary, becomes part of the invasion mythology, emphasizing both the virtue of Japanese resistance and the barbarism of the Mongol enemy. By October 15th, Tsushima and Iki are secured. The path to Kyushu is clear. The news of these massacres reaches Kyushu before the Mongol fleet does. The psychological impact is profound. These are not the civil wars the samurai are accustomed to, where defeated warriors might switch sides or negotiate terms. This is existential warfare. The Mongols offer only submission or annihilation. If you appreciate stories like this, tales of courage in the face of overwhelming odds, of cultural collisions that shape the course of nations, please take a moment to subscribe to our channel and leave a comment sharing your thoughts. Your support allows us to continue bringing these incredible, often overlooked chapters of history to life. And now, as the Mongol fleet approaches the shores of Kyushu, the true test begins. The morning of November 19th, 1274, breaks cold and clear over Hakata Bay. The Mongol fleet, reduced to perhaps 800 ships after storms and the Tsushima Iki operations, fills the bay. On shore, the Japanese defenders have assembled. The estimates vary, but most sources suggest around 6,000 samurai from various Kyushu clans, plus several thousand auxiliary troops. They are commanded, if that's the right word for the loosely coordinated force, by a council of daimyo including representatives of the Kikuchi, Shoni, and Otomo clans. Among them is Takezaki Suenaga, the young samurai we met in the opening scene. Suenaga is a fascinating figure because, unlike most samurai of his era, he leaves us a detailed visual record of the invasion. Years after the battle, he will commission the Moko Shurai Ekotoba, illustrated account of the Mongol invasion, a scroll painting depicting the events of 1274. While the scrolls serve partly as self-promotion, Suenaga wants to ensure his brave deeds are recognized and rewarded. They provide invaluable details about the battle. Suenaga is not a great lord. He's a low-ranking samurai from Higo province, fighting to prove himself, to gain honor and recognition, to secure rewards that might improve his family's position. He has perhaps 5 or 6 mounted retainers under his command, basically his personal entourage. As the Mongol ships begin landing troops on the beaches of Hakata, Suenaga faces a crucial decision: wait for coordinated action with the other samurai, or charge immediately to be first into battle, and thus claim first honors. He chooses glory over caution. Picture the scene as the Mongol landing craft, smaller boats launched from the main ships, approach the beaches. From the Mongol perspective, the ships scrape onto the sand. Warriors pour out, Mongol cavalry archers, Chinese infantry with pole weapons and swords, Korean soldiers in their distinctive armor. They form up with practiced efficiency. Shields forward, archers behind, creating a defensive perimeter as more boats land. The landscape is alien, different from the steppes of Mongolia, different from the plains of China, different from the hills of Korea. But the Mongol system is designed to be adaptable. Officers shout orders in multiple languages, drums signal formations, banners mark unit positions, then they see the Japanese charging. From Suenaga's perspective, the moment has come. Suenaga, astride his horse, wearing his ancestral armor, his war banner flying behind him carried by a retainer, kicks his horse into a gallop and charges toward the Mongol lines. In traditional samurai warfare, this is when he would shout his name and lineage, challenging worthy opponents to individual combat. He does exactly that, yelling his ancestry, his accomplishments, his right to be here. The Mongols have no idea what he's saying and don't care. What happens next is seared into Suenaga's memory and later depicted in his scrolls. The Mongols respond with massed archery and explosive projectiles. The scrolls show Mongol warriors with what appear to be bombs or fire weapons attached to arrows. When they hit, they explode with thunderous noise and flames. Suenaga's horse is struck. He's thrown to the ground. All around him, other charging samurai are being cut down by volleys of arrows before they can close to sword range. This is warfare as Japanese have never experienced it. No individual challenges, no waiting for formal combat to begin. No honor in the sense samurai understand it, just killing, efficient and impersonal. Suenaga survives, barely, rescued by his retainers who drag him back from the Mongol lines. But the lesson is clear. Traditional samurai tactics are suicidal against Mongol coordinated warfare. The samurai are brave, but they're not stupid. After the initial charges prove disastrous, they begin adapting. The Japanese have several advantages. Knowledge of terrain. They know every road, hill, and forest path. Motivation. They're defending their homes. Skill at archery and swordplay. If they can survive to close quarters, they're formidable numbers in specific locations. While outnumbered overall, they can concentrate forces at key points. The battle evolves into a chaotic running fight across the coastal plain around Hakata. Small groups of samurai use hit-and-run tactics, attacking Mongol formations and retreating before they can be surrounded. Japanese archers provide covering fire from elevated positions. The Mongols, for their part, are displaying their usual tactical sophistication, using feigned retreats to draw Japanese into ambushes, coordinating cavalry and infantry attacks, employing their longer-range composite bows to devastating effect, using explosive projectiles to terrify horses and break up samurai charges. The fighting is brutal and personal. Japanese sources record individual samurai performing extraordinary acts of courage. A warrior named Kikuchi Takefusa reportedly holding a bridge single-handedly against dozens of Mongol warriors. Another named Shoni Kagesuke rallying broken formations and leading counterattacks. Mongol sources, filtered through Chinese and Korean accounts, record their frustration with Japanese tenacity. The samurai refuse to break even when surrounded, often fighting to the death rather than retreating. Wounded samurai commit seppuku rather than be captured. It's a kind of fanaticism the Mongols have rarely encountered, different from the terror-driven desperation of other conquered peoples. By late afternoon, both sides are exhausted. The Mongols control the beach and have pushed perhaps a mile inland. The Japanese still hold the interior and the roads to the fortified town of Dazaifu, the regional administrative center, about 10 miles inland. As the sun begins setting around 5 p.m., something unexpected happens. The Mongols begin withdrawing to their ships. This surprises and confuses the Japanese. By the ruthless calculus of the battlefield, the Mongols are winning. They've established a beachhead. They have superior numbers. Given another day or two, they could almost certainly push inland and take Dazaifu. So why are they leaving? The truth is, we don't entirely know. Historical sources offer several possible explanations. Theory 1. Casualties were higher than expected. The samurai, for all their tactical disadvantages, fought with such ferocity that Mongol casualties may have been significant. Some sources suggest the Mongol commanders, Hongdagu and others, were wounded. A costly victory is still a defeat in military terms. Theory 2. Supply concerns. The Mongol force was operating at the end of a long supply line. If they couldn't secure a quick victory and establish secure supply bases, they risked being cut off. Theory 3. Weather concerns. It was late November. The Sea of Japan becomes increasingly dangerous in winter. The commanders may have decided to withdraw while conditions were still favorable for sailing. Theory 4. The plan was always a raid, not a conquest. Some historians argue the 1274 expedition was intended as a large-scale raid to test Japanese defenses, inflict damage, and intimidate, rather than an attempt at full conquest. The withdrawal was thus planned from the start. Theory 5. Korean reluctance. The Korean sailors and soldiers, forced into service by their Mongol overlords, may have been less than enthusiastic about the campaign. Their lack of commitment could have influenced the decision to withdraw. Likely, the truth involves elements of all these factors. What is certain is that as darkness falls on November 19, 1274, the Mongol fleet is boarding their ships and preparing to sail. The invasion is ending after a single day of fighting. The Japanese defenders, exhausted and bloodied, but victorious by virtue of holding the field, watch from the beaches in a mixture of relief and disbelief. Have they actually repelled the Mongol Empire? The Mongol fleet weighs anchor and begins moving out of Hakata Bay in the late evening of November 19th. And then the weather changes. Around midnight, a storm strikes. Not a typhoon, it's the wrong season, but a severe winter storm, the kind that can blow up quickly in the Sea of Japan in late November. The Mongol fleet, packed with thousands of men and horses, loaded with equipment and supplies, sailing vessels designed for rivers and coastal waters rather than open ocean, is caught in the worst possible position, at sea, in the dark, in a storm, in unfamiliar waters. What happens next is catastrophic. Ships collide with each other in the darkness and driving rain. Others are driven onto rocks along the coastline. Some capsize in heavy seas. Men are thrown overboard, drowning in armor that drags them down. Horses scream in terror as ships break apart. When dawn breaks on November 20th, the scene is apocalyptic. Wreckage strewn along miles of coastline, bodies washing up on beaches, the remnants of the fleet scattered and damaged. Contemporary sources give varying casualty figures, but most suggest approximately 13,000 men, more than 1/3 of the invasion force, perished in the storm. This is one of the deadliest naval disasters in pre-modern history, killing more men in one night than died in most entire medieval battles. To the Japanese, samurai, civilians, priests, and the imperial court, the storm's timing seems beyond mere chance. It seems like divine intervention. After all, the Mongols withdrew just hours before the storm struck. The storm hit at the precise moment to catch the fleet at sea. The devastation was so complete it prevented any immediate return. The conclusion seems obvious. The gods have protected Japan. The term that will later become famous, kamikaze, divine wind, doesn't appear immediately in 1274 sources, but the concept is born here, that Japan is a sacred land, protected by the gods, which no foreign power can conquer. The emperor and the Buddhist temples organize massive thanksgiving ceremonies. The storm is attributed to the prayers of priests and the divine favor of Amaterasu, Hachiman, and the host of Kami, Shinto deities, who protect Japan. This interpretation will have profound consequences. It reinforces Japanese exceptionalism, the belief that Japan is uniquely favored by heaven. It validates the power of prayer and religious ritual in national defense. And it creates a dangerous complacency. If the gods will always protect Japan, why prepare extensively for future invasions? The surviving Mongol and Korean forces limp back to Korea in damaged ships, their expedition in ruins. From the Mongol perspective, this was a setback, yes, but not a decisive defeat. They had successfully landed in Japan, fought the samurai and found them brave but beatable, and would have conquered the beachhead given more time. The storm was bad luck, not military failure. Kublai Khan's response to the news of the disaster is telling. He immediately begins planning a second, larger invasion. The 1274 expedition taught the Mongols valuable lessons. Japanese defenses were substantial but not insurmountable. Samurai fighting methods were no match for Mongol coordination. A larger force with better logistics could succeed. More ships and better ships would be needed. If anything, the costly failure makes Kublai more determined. No one defies the Mongol Empire. The gods may have granted Japan a reprieve, but the Khan will return. Suenaga survives the battle, but his problems are just beginning. Remember, he's a low-ranking samurai who charged ahead of the main forces seeking glory. He fought bravely, was wounded, and helped defend Japan. But in the aftermath, when rewards are being distributed by the Hojo Regency, Suenaga is overlooked. The great lords receive recognition and land grants. The low-ranking samurai, who actually did much of the fighting, receive little or nothing. This is intolerable to Suenaga. He has risked his life. He has upheld the samurai code. He deserves recognition. So he does something extraordinary. He travels to Kamakura, the seat of the shogunate, nearly 1,000 miles from Kyushu, to personally petition the regent, Hojo Tokimune, for recognition of his service. This journey, made at his own expense, a significant financial burden for a minor samurai, shows both Suenaga's determination and the dysfunctional nature of the reward system. Warriors shouldn't need to travel hundreds of miles to beg for what they've earned. Eventually, after years of petitioning, Suenaga receives some recognition and a small land grant. And he commissions those scrolls, the Moko Shurai, Eko Toba, to memorialize his service and ensure his deeds aren't forgotten. Those scrolls, preserved for 750 years, now provide historians with our most detailed visual evidence of the Mongol invasions. Suenaga's vanity became history's gift. Dr. Thomas Conlon notes, Suenaga's scrolls are problematic as historical sources. They're self-serving and sometimes exaggerate his role, but they're also invaluable. They show us what the participants thought was important about the invasion. The new weapons, the cultural clash, the chaos of battle. Without Suenaga's ego, we'd know far less about how the invasion actually unfolded. We've already met Sukekuni, the defender of Tsushima who died in the invasion's first battles. His story becomes legendary in Japan, the embodiment of samurai virtues, courage against impossible odds, loyalty unto death, refusal to surrender. But there's a human tragedy here too. Sukekuni left a widow and children. Tsushima was devastated, its population massacred or enslaved, its fields burned, its temples destroyed. The So clan, which controlled Tsushima, had to be rebuilt from almost nothing. Sukekuni's son, So Tsuneshige, became the new lord and spent decades trying to restore the island. But Tsushima never fully recovered its pre-invasion population or prosperity. And there's a bitter irony. In later centuries, when Japan and Korea established limited trade relations, Tsushima, sitting between the two countries, became a crucial intermediary, profiting from the very Korean connections established through the trauma of the Mongol invasion. Sukekuni's sacrifice bought Japan time to prepare for the second invasion in 1281. Whether he would think that worth the annihilation of his island is a question we cannot answer. We don't know his name. We can't know his name. He doesn't appear in any chronicle, any scroll, any official history. But we can reconstruct his experience from the broader historical record. He is one of the 8,000 Korean soldiers and 7,000 Korean sailors pressed into service for the 1274 invasion. Perhaps he's a farmer, conscripted from his village in southern Korea. Perhaps he's a former soldier from the Korean army that resisted the Mongol conquest and is now forced to serve his conquerors. He doesn't want to be here. Korea itself was brutally conquered by the Mongols less than 20 years ago in campaigns that killed hundreds of thousands and devastated the countryside. Now he's expected to help inflict the same horrors on another people. He builds the ships that will carry the invasion force, laboring in Korean shipyards under Mongol overseers. He boards one of those ships, crowded, uncomfortable, reeking of horses and unwashed men. He crosses to Tsushima, perhaps participates in the massacre there, or perhaps manages to avoid the worst atrocities. He lands at Hakata Bay on November 19th. Maybe he fights bravely, fearing Mongol punishment for cowardice more than Japanese swords. Maybe he deliberately aims poorly, secretly hoping the Japanese will throw back the invasion. We can't know, but we know he survives the battle and boards ship for the withdrawal. And then the storm hits. Perhaps he's among the 13,000 who die that night, drowning in the cold waters of the Sea of Japan, hundreds of miles from his home and family, dying in service to an empire he never chose to serve, in an invasion he likely opposed. Or perhaps he's among the survivors, limping back to Korea, traumatized by battle and storm, returning to a homeland that is no longer truly his, serving masters who view him as expendable. The Mongol invasions of Japan killed tens of thousands. The Korean forced laborers and soldiers are among the most forgotten victims. They died for neither their own country nor by their own choice, pawns in a geopolitical game played by Mongol Khans and Japanese regents. Their story reminds us that in every great historical event, the majority of participants are not the kings and generals whose names we remember, but ordinary people swept up in forces beyond their control. The Mongol fleet may have retreated in 1274, but everyone knows it will return. The question is not if, but when. For the next 7 years, Japan exists in a state of constant alert and preparation. It's a remarkable period that fundamentally changes Japanese society and military organization. Hojo Tokimune, who was an untested 18-year-old regent when the invasion began, matures into a decisive leader. He faces multiple crises. 1. Military preparation. Orders the construction of a massive stone wall around Hakata Bay, a fortification project that employs thousands of workers for years, reorganizes the samurai system to improve coordination and command structure, stockpiles weapons and supplies in Kyushu, establishes a more effective coastal warning system. 2. Economic strain. The defensive preparations are bankrupting the country. Samurai who fought in 1274 demand rewards, like Suinaga, but there's no conquered territory to distribute as rewards. The traditional system of funding military service through land grants is breaking down. 3. Diplomatic maneuvering. Kublai sends several more diplomatic missions between 1275-1279 demanding submission. Tokimune's response is uncompromising. In 1275, he has the Mongol envoys executed. This is a shocking breach of diplomatic protocol, but it sends a clear message. Japan will never submit. 4. Psychological warfare. The executed Mongol envoys' heads are displayed publicly. Buddhist temples continue intensive prayers for divine protection. Propaganda emphasizes the gods' favor and samurai courage, but underlying the bravado is genuine fear. Can Japan really withstand another invasion? The defensive wall built around Hakata Bay deserves special mention. It's approximately 12 miles long, standing 610 feet high and 6 feet thick in most sections, made of stone held together with clay. This is one of the largest construction projects in medieval Japanese history. It employs thousands of workers, peasants, craftsmen, and samurai overseeing the work. The economic burden is immense. But the war represents more than military architecture. It represents a psychological shift. Japan is taking the Mongol threat seriously. This is no longer about individual samurai glory, but national survival. The wall is defensive, unglamorous, collective. Everything traditional samurai warfare was not. When the second invasion comes in 1281, outside the scope of this narrative, but worth mentioning, the wall will prove its worth, preventing Mongol forces from easily landing and establishing beachheads as they did in 1274. Meanwhile, Kublai Khan is dealing with his own problems. 1. The conquest of southern Song China, 1275-1279. This massive military campaign, the final conquest of China, absorbs most of Kublai's military resources. Japan must wait. 2. Rebellions and resistance. Mongol rule is never entirely secure. Rebellions, banditry, and resistance movements require constant military attention. 3. The Japanese defiance. The execution of his envoys in 1275 infuriates Kublai. No one treats Mongol diplomats this way. The insult demands response. But Kublai is also aging. He's in his 60s by the late 1270s, and increasingly aware that time is limited. His grandfather Genghis Khan created the empire. His brother Mongke expanded it. Kublai has consolidated it and conquered China. But Japan remains unconquered, a thorn in his pride, an insult to Mongol invincibility. When the Song dynasty finally falls in 1279, Kublai immediately orders preparations for a second invasion of Japan. This time, there will be no half measures. This time, he will send an overwhelming force that can crush Japanese resistance definitively. The stage is set for the Second Mongol invasion of 1281, but that is another story. The Battle of Bun'ei in 1274 and the larger Mongol invasion attempts have profound and lasting impacts on Japanese history and East Asian geopolitics. Immediate consequences, 1274 to 1300s. 1. Japanese national identity. The invasions create, perhaps for the first time, a strong sense of Japanese national identity transcending regional and clan loyalties. The samurai of Kyushu weren't just defending their own domains, they were defending Japan. 2. Kamikaze mythology. The storm of November 1274 and an even more devastating typhoon during the 1281 invasion establishes the idea of divine protection. This mythology will persist for centuries, culminating in the kamikaze suicide pilots of World War II, named explicitly for the divine wind that saved Japan from the Mongols. 3. Military innovation. The Japanese are forced to adapt their military tactics and organization. While they retain samurai traditions, they become more pragmatic about unit coordination, defensive fortifications, and combined arms tactics. 4. Economic crisis. The cost of defense nearly bankrupts the Kamakura shogunate. Samurai who fought receive inadequate rewards, creating resentment. This economic strain contributes to the shogunate's eventual collapse in 1333. 5. Mongol Empire's limits. The failed invasions of Japan, 1274 and 1281, represent one of the few clear defeats of the Mongol military machine. They demonstrate that Mongol power, while vast, is not unlimited. Naval invasions are harder than land conquests. Long-term impacts, 14th to 20th centuries. 1. Japanese isolationism. The trauma of the Mongol invasions contributes to Japanese suspicion of foreign contact. While Japan continues limited trade, especially with China and Korea, there's an underlying fear of foreign invasion that persists for centuries. 2. Korean-Japanese relations. The role of Korean forced labor in the Mongol invasions complicates an already difficult relationship. Yet, the very fact of Korean involvement creates connections. Former enemies sometimes become trading partners and cultural intermediaries. 3. Military culture. The Mongol invasions validate certain aspects of samurai culture: courage, loyalty, willingness to die, while discrediting others, emphasis on individual combat over unit cohesion. The evolution toward more organized, group-oriented military structures accelerates. 4. Religious power. Buddhist temples and Shinto shrines that claim their prayers saved Japan from the Mongols gain enormous prestige and wealth. Religious institutions become even more central to Japanese political and social life. 5. Historical memory. The invasions become central to Japanese historical consciousness. They're depicted in art, literature, and theater for centuries. The scrolls of Takazaki Suenaga are copied and recopied. The story is told and retold, often with embellishments. Dr. Rosabi Morris, professor of Asian history at Columbia University, argues, the failed Mongol invasions of Japan were historically significant not just for Japan, but for world history. They demonstrated the limits of the largest land empire in history. They showed that islands with determined defenders and naval barriers could resist even the Mongols. This had implications for Southeast Asian kingdoms, for Indonesia, and eventually for European colonial powers trying to understand how to project power across water. The invasions also represent one of the earliest and largest amphibious assault operations in history. The logistics of transporting 23,000 warriors in 1274, and later 140,000 warriors in 1281 across the sea, landing them on hostile shores and supplying them were unprecedented in East Asian warfare. The Mongols' partial success in 1274 and complete failure in 1281 provided lessons that military planners would study for centuries. For centuries, the Mongol invasions existed primarily in documents and scrolls. But in recent decades, underwater archaeology has begun revealing physical evidence that confirms, contradicts, and complicates the traditional narratives. Starting in the 1980s and accelerating in the 2000s, Japanese archaeologists began systematically exploring Hakata Bay and the waters around Iki and Tsushima. What they've found is remarkable. Ship remains, wooden hull sections from Mongol invasion ships. Evidence of construction techniques showing a mix of Chinese and Korean shipbuilding methods. Indications that many ships were hastily built and perhaps not seaworthy for extended ocean voyages. Weapons and equipment, iron arrowheads, both Mongol and Japanese types, allowing comparison of metallurgy and design. Exploding projectiles, ceramic or metal spheres packed with gunpowder, confirming Japanese accounts of thunderbolt weapons. Armor fragments from both sides, personal items, belt buckles, seals, ceramic vessels, coins. Human remains, skeletal remains showing evidence of traumatic injuries, bones scattered across wide areas, suggesting the violence of the storm-induced shipwrecks. Dr. Kenzo Hayashida, who led many of these underwater excavations, notes, "The physical evidence confirms that the Mongol invasions were real, massive, and devastating. But it also shows us details the written sources miss. We can see that the Mongol fleet was perhaps less prepared for ocean conditions than traditionally thought. We can analyze the weapons and understand the technological gap between Mongol and Japanese forces. We can literally touch history." The underwater archaeology has answered some questions and raised others. Confirmed, the invasions happened on the scale described in sources. The Mongols did use explosive projectiles, early gunpowder weapons. A massive naval disaster did occur, scattering wreckage across wide areas. The ships were a mix of Chinese and Korean construction. Complicated, some ships appear to have been poorly constructed, supporting theories that the Korean shipbuilders, working under Mongol coercion, may have engaged in subtle sabotage. The distribution of wreckage suggests not one massive storm, but possibly multiple smaller weather events. Evidence suggests some Mongol forces may have remained in Japan for days or weeks after the main fleet departed, complicating the narrative of immediate withdrawal. Still mysterious. The exact casualty figures, written sources vary widely. The specific causes of the Mongol withdrawal on November 19th, whether the 1274 expedition was intended as conquest or reconnaissance in force, how many Mongol Korean soldiers may have survived and integrated into Japanese society. As we step back from the details, the troop numbers, the tactical maneuvers, the archaeological evidence, and contemplate the broader human significance of the Battle of Bun'ei, what lessons emerge? At its deepest level, the Mongol invasion of Japan represents a collision between two utterly incompatible worldviews. The Mongol perspective. Empire is the natural order. Might makes right. Resistance to Mongol power is not just futile, but morally wrong. Cultural differences are irrelevant. All peoples should submit to. The Khan victory justifies any means. Practical results matter more than abstract honor. The Japanese perspective. Japan is unique, divine, special. Honor and proper form matter as much as results. Some things are worth dying for, even if victory is impossible. Cultural and religious identity are non-negotiable. Submission to foreign power is unthinkable. Individual glory and family honor transcend strategic calculation. Neither side could comprehend the other. The Mongols saw Japanese resistance as irrational stubbornness. The Japanese saw Mongol demands as barbarian arrogance. The battle was not just about territory or tribute, but about fundamental incompatibility. Dr. Mary Elizabeth Berry, professor of Japanese history at Berkeley, writes, "The Mongol invasions forced Japan to confront the reality that there was a vast world beyond their shores, a world that didn't share their values or respect their claims to uniqueness. The Japanese response, violent resistance combined with appeals to divine protection, set patterns that would recur throughout Japanese history whenever foreign powers came calling. The storm that destroyed much of the Mongol fleet on November 19th-20th, 1274, raises profound questions about the role of chance in history. Without that storm, the Mongol fleet might have returned to try landing again. With proper resupply and reinforcement, the beachhead could have been expanded. Japanese defenses, uncoordinated and unprepared, might have eventually crumbled. Japan could have become part of the Mongol Empire. Would Mongol conquest have been permanent? Probably not. The Mongol Empire was already beginning its long fragmentation, and controlling a rebellious island population would have been difficult, but the short-term impact could have been devastating. Massacre, enslavement, destruction of temples, imposition of Mongol administration. The storm prevented all of that. But was it divine intervention or meteorological chance? The Japanese chose to see it as divine. This interpretation served important purposes. It validated their sense of special destiny. It empowered the religious institutions that claimed responsibility. It gave hope for the future. But it also created dangerous complacency. If the gods always protect Japan, why maintain expensive defenses? This thinking would persist into the 20th century with tragic consequences. The historian must note the paradox. The storm saved Japan in 1274, but the interpretation of the storm, as guaranteed divine protection, may have made Japan more vulnerable in the long run. The Mongol invasions accelerated a transformation in Japanese military culture from individual to collective orientation. Samurai culture in 1274 was intensely individualistic: personal honor, family name, one-on-one combat, public recognition of individual achievements. But Mongol tactics, massed archery, coordinated unit movements, collective assault required collective responses. The stone wall at Hakata Bay was a collective defense. The warning beacon system was collective coordination. The military reorganizations under Hojo Tokimune emphasized unit cohesion over individual glory. Takazaki Suenaga's story illustrates the tension. He fought bravely as an individual, but had to create propaganda to ensure he received recognition. His scrolls show both the old values, individual combat, personal achievement, and the new reality, being part of a larger, coordinated defense. This shift from individual to collective would continue throughout Japanese history, eventually producing the militaristic nationalism of the 20th century. The seeds were planted, in part, on the beaches of Hakata Bay in 1274. The defense of Japan in 1274, and again in 1281, came at enormous cost. Human, thousands killed in battle. Civilians on Tsushima and Iki massacred or enslaved. Families destroyed. Trauma affecting survivors for the rest of their lives. Economic, defensive preparations bankrupting the government. Agricultural production disrupted, trade with Korea and China damaged. Samurai reward system breaking down. Social, increased centralization of power. Greater government intrusion into local affairs. Religious institutions gaining political influence. Militarization of society. Was it worth it? The Japanese certainly thought so. Sovereignty, the right to govern themselves, maintain their culture, worship their gods, was non-negotiable. But the costs were real and lasting. This raises a question relevant to every age. What price is worth paying for independence? At what point do the costs of resistance exceed the costs of submission? Different peoples in different times have answered differently. The Japanese in 1274 chose resistance, whatever the cost. On November 19, 1274, on the beaches of Hakata Bay, two worlds collided. The Mongol Empire, the largest, most powerful empire in human history, met Japanese samurai defending an island nation that had never been successfully invaded. The battle lasted one day, the storm lasted one night, but the consequences echoed across centuries. When we remember the Battle of Bun'ei today, we should remember the courage of individuals. So Sukakuni on Tsushima, fighting to the death against impossible odds. Takazaki Suenaga, charging into Mongol arrows. The nameless samurai and foot soldiers who stood their ground. The tragedy of the powerless. The Korean sailors and soldiers forced to participate in an invasion they likely opposed, dying in waters far from home. The contingency of history, how a storm changed everything, how different weather might have meant a different world. The power of belief, how Japanese faith in divine protection, whether factually grounded or not, shaped national identity and historical memory for 750 years. The limits of power, how even the Mongol Empire, which conquered from China to Hungary, could not cross a narrow strait and subdue determined defenders. The human cost of sovereignty. The thousands who died, the families destroyed, the treasure expended, all to maintain independence. The Mongol invasion of 1274 was not the largest battle in history, nor the most decisive, but it was a hinge moment, a moment when the course of history pivoted on courage, calculation, and chance. In our own time, when we think about cultural clashes, about the defense of sovereignty, about the role of belief and chance in shaping events, about the costs and necessities of resistance, we can learn from those November days in 1274 when samurai faced Mongol archers, when prayers met pragmatism, when individual courage confronted organized empire. History is not a simple narrative of progress or decline. It is the sum of countless individual choices made under pressure, often with incomplete information, by people who did the best they could with what they had. On November 19th, 1274, thousands of such choices were made. Some led to death, some to survival, some to glory, some to tragedy. Together, they preserved Japan's independence and created a mythology that would sustain a nation for centuries. The divine wind, whether sent by gods or simply a fortuitous storm, saved Japan that night. But the human wind, the courage and sacrifice of samurai defenders, the stubbornness of leaders who refused submission, the collective determination of a people to remain free, mattered just as much. Perhaps more. For the gods may send storms, but only humans can give them meaning. The story doesn't end in 1274. 7 years later, in 1281, Kublai Khan tried again with an invasion force of approximately 140,000 men, the largest amphibious assault in history until World War II. The Japanese were better prepared. The stone wall at Hakata Bay prevented easy landings. The samurai had adapted their tactics. Coordination improved. For weeks, Japanese defenders held the Mongols at bay, and then, on August 15th-16th, 1280, a massive typhoon struck, far more devastating than the 1274 storm. In 2 days, it destroyed most of the Mongol fleet and killed perhaps 100,000 men. After that, Kublai never tried again. The divine wind had spoken twice. Japan remained unconquered, but that, as they say, is another story. Thank you for joining us on this journey through one of history's most dramatic confrontations. If these stories of courage, sacrifice, and the contingencies that shape our world resonate with you, please subscribe to our channel, share this video, and let us know in the comments what historical event you'd like us to explore next. History is not dead. It lives in the choices we make today, informed by the lessons of yesterday. Until next time, remember, we are all writing history, one choice at a time.